The UFC world is in absolute chaos. Dana White has just dropped the hammer on Islam Makhachev, a massive $10 million fine that has sent shockwaves through the entire promotion. The reigning welterweight champion, the #1 pound-for-pound fighter on the planet, is now at war with the UFC CEO. The timing is devastating. Makhachev is just weeks away from defending his title against Ian Garry at UFC 330 on August 15 in Philadelphia. A win would break Anderson Silva's record with 17 consecutive UFC victories. But the Dagestani champion has been openly critical of Dana White and the UFC's promotional machine. The MMA community is erupting. Fans are furious. Fighters are weighing in. And the biggest question everyone is asking is simple. Is this protecting the brand or silencing the king? The $10 million fine is unprecedented in UFC history. Fighters have been fined before for missing weight, for post-fight comments, for violating the promotion's code of conduct. But $10 million is not a fine. It's a statement. It's a warning to every fighter on the roster. Cross Dana White, and you will pay. The punishment is so severe that many are questioning its legality. Can the UFC actually fine a fighter $10 million? The answer lies in the contracts fighters sign. The UFC's exclusive promotional agreement contains clauses that allow the promotion to impose fines for conduct that damages the brand or violates the spirit of the contract. But $10 million is unprecedented. It's more than most fighters earn in their entire careers. For Makhachev, who has made millions but not tens of millions, the fine is a devastating financial blow. The timing of the fine is equally suspicious. Makhachev is just weeks away from the biggest fight of his career, his first welterweight title defense against Ian Garry at UFC 330 on August 15. The champion is preparing for a battle that could cement his legacy as one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. A win would break Anderson Silva's record with 17 consecutive UFC victories. A win would silence the doubters who still question his greatness. Instead, he's fighting a war on two fronts. Inside the cage, he faces a dangerous challenger in Ian Garry, who has been pushing for this fight for months and has already questioned Makhachev's injury narrative. Outside the cage, he faces a UFC CEO who has just hit him with the largest fine in promotion history. But the question everyone is asking is simple. What did Makhachev do to deserve this? The answer is complicated. Makhachev has been openly critical of Dana White's promotional machine. He claimed the organization has lost interest in his rise and that White is already looking for people to replace him. He has accused the UFC of favoring certain fighters over others. He has questioned the promotion's matchmaking decisions, and he has done it all publicly, without filtering his words. The UFC has always tolerated criticism from fighters, as long as it doesn't cross a line. But Makhachev has crossed that line. He has challenged the UFC's authority. He has challenged Dana White's authority, and he has paid the price. The MMA community is erupting. Fans are furious. Social media is flooded with reactions. Some are defending Makhachev, arguing that the fine is a blatant abuse of power. Others are arguing that Makhachev brought this on himself by speaking out. The debate is passionate and divided. Fighters are weighing in privately and publicly. Some are privately expressing concern that the fine could be used as a precedent to punish other fighters. Others are publicly applauding White for taking a stand. But the overwhelming sentiment is anger. Anger at the UFC for punishing a fighter for speaking his mind. Anger at Dana White for his hypocrisy. After all, he has publicly criticized fighters and promoters with impunity. Anger at the system that allows a promoter to destroy a fighter's career with a single decision. What happens next is anyone's guess. Makhachev could fight the fine, potentially taking the UFC to court. He could accept the punishment and move on. He could use the controversy as motivation to destroy Garry at UFC 330. The options are endless, but the damage is already done. The relationship between Makhachev and the UFC is irreparably damaged. The champion who once represented the future of the sport is now a cautionary tale. The lesson is clear. In the UFC, even the pound-for-pound king is not safe from Dana White's wrath. The next chapter of this story will determine the future of the sport, and the outcome is far from certain. The countdown to UFC 330 has become a countdown to war, and no one knows who will survive. To understand the magnitude of the $10 million fine, you have to understand what Islam Makhachev said to provoke it. The reigning welterweight champion, the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, has been openly critical of Dana White and the UFC's promotional machine. His words, delivered in a Russian interview with Udar Kanal, struck at the heart of the UFC's identity. At the UFC, I think they've started to work less on this, Makhachev said. Before, the UFC was capable of turning absolutely anyone into a star. It was them who did it. They promoted the fighters, and they paid a lot of attention to everything. The criticism was not a rant. It was a calculated, measured assessment of the promotion's current state. Makhachev argued that the UFC has lost its promotional fire. He pointed to the past when the organization could make a star of anyone with aggressive marketing. Now, he sees a machine that has slowed down. He sees a Dana White who is distracted by other ventures, Zuffa boxing, slap fighting, and other projects that pull his attention away from the fighters who built the company. Dana is already a big man. He is involved in many other things now, Makhachev said. If the UFC wants to make a fight huge, they are capable of it. They just need to want to do it. Dana must, I don't know, return to his roots, to the way he started, to the way he built everything. The words are not just criticism, they're a plea. A call for White to rediscover the passion that made the UFC the dominant force in combat sports. But Makhachev didn't stop there. He delivered the line that likely triggered the unprecedented fine. You know, a person can also lose motivation. He's been at the top for so long, and I know he's already slowly starting to look for people who will replace him. The implication is devastating. Makhachev is suggesting that Dana White is preparing for his exit, that the UFC CEO is already looking for a successor, that the man who built the UFC is no longer fully invested in its future. For a promotion that has been defined by White's relentless energy for over 2 decades, the suggestion is almost blasphemous. And for White, who has always controlled the narrative around his own future, the public speculation was unacceptable. The $10 million fine was the response. But Makhachev's criticism wasn't just about White's motivation. It was about the UFC's treatment of its fighters. Makhachev had also been openly critical of the promotion's matchmaking. He had previously suggested that there were better alternatives for a title shot than Ian Garry, hinting that Carlos Prates or Michael Morales would offer a more interesting matchup for the UFC. The champion's willingness to question the UFC's decisions is rare. Most fighters stay silent. They accept the matchups they're given. They don't publicly criticize the promotion. But Makhachev is not most fighters. He is the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world, a 2-division champion with the power to break Anderson Silva's record with his next win. He believes he has earned the right to speak his mind, and he did. The timing of Makhachev's criticism is crucial. His comments came at a moment when the UFC was under intense scrutiny. The promotion had just launched Zuffa Boxing, a direct competitor to established boxing promotions. The UFC 330 card was being built, and Makhachev had publicly questioned the choice of Ian Garry as his opponent. He had also made comments about the promotion losing its promotional energy, which is a direct criticism of Dana White's leadership. White, who has always viewed himself as the driving force behind the UFC's success, took the criticism personally. The $10 million fine was his response. It was a warning to every fighter on the roster. Cross Dana White and you will pay. But the fine has backfired spectacularly. Instead of silencing Makhachev, it has galvanized the MMA community. Fighters are speaking out. Fans are furious. And Makhachev, who was already preparing for the biggest fight of his career, has become a symbol of resistance against the UFC's power. The next chapter of this story will explore the aftermath of the fine. How is Makhachev responding? What are the fighters saying? And will this be the moment that changes the UFC forever? The $10 million fine sent shockwaves through the MMA community. But the backlash was immediate and ferocious. Fans flooded social media with outrage. Fighters began speaking out. And the narrative shifted from "what did Makhachev do?" to "what is Dana White doing?" The timing of the fine is devastating. Makhachev is just weeks away from the biggest fight of his career. His first welterweight title defense is against Ian Garry at UFC 330 on August 15 in Philadelphia. A win would break Anderson Silva's record with 17 consecutive UFC victories. The champion is preparing for a battle that could cement his legacy as one of the greatest fighters in UFC history. Instead, he's fighting a war on 2 fronts. But Makhachev's criticism of Dana White went far beyond the promotion's promotional efforts. He had also accused the UFC CEO of losing motivation and preparing for retirement. You know, a person can also lose motivation. He's been at the top for so long. And I know he's already slowly starting to look for people who will replace him. The implication is devastating. Makhachev is suggesting that Dana White is preparing for his exit, that the man who built the UFC is no longer fully invested in its future. The MMA community erupted. Fans on social media demanded answers. Some defended Makhachev, arguing that he was simply speaking the truth. Others criticized White, accusing him of using his power to silence a fighter who had the courage to speak out. "If you're not John Jones, you have to defend your belt or you will be stripped," one fan wrote, referencing the UFC's preferential treatment of certain fighters. "The fact Islam had to vacate and John has not is wild," another commented. The backlash isn't just limited to fans. Fighters are weighing in, though most are doing so privately, fearing the same punishment that Makhachev received. But some have been vocal. Brendan Schaub, the former UFC heavyweight and current podcaster, recently ripped into Ian Garry, saying he needs to shut up and fight. The comments were directed at Garry's recent controversial interviews, where he claimed the world would be better off if women ruled it. While Schaub's criticism wasn't about the fine, it underscores the tension surrounding the UFC 330 main event. Makhachev has been open about his desire to fight at the UFC White House card, which was planned for June 2026. He accepted the fight against Ilia Topuria, but the bout fell through when Topuria's team demanded an unrealistic purse. Makhachev claimed he accepted the fight and that Topuria pulled out. But Dana White denied this version of events. "That's not true," White said. "There are a lot of things happening behind the scenes to make this card happen. First, the Jon Jones fight fell through, then the Ilia and Islam fight. I had to work with the possibilities the matchmakers gave me, and I built the card. The contradiction is striking." Makhachev says he accepted the fight. White said it never happened, and the UFC community is left wondering who to believe. Makhachev's willingness to speak out has made him a target, but it has also made him a hero to fighters who feel trapped by the UFC's system. The $10 million fine is not just a punishment for Makhachev. It's a message to every fighter on the roster: speak out, and you will pay. The debate over the fine has also reignited discussions about the UFC's promotional strategy. Makhachev argued that the UFC has lost interest in promoting fighters and that the promotion is no longer capable of turning anyone into a star. He pointed to the promotion's past success with fighters like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, and Brock Lesnar, contrasting it with the current approach. Before, the UFC was capable of turning absolutely anyone into a star, Makhachev said. It was them who did it. They promoted the fighters, and they paid a lot of attention to everything. The criticism is a direct challenge to Dana White's leadership, and it comes at a moment when the UFC is under intense scrutiny. The promotion has just launched Zuffa Boxing, a direct competitor to established boxing promotions. White is also involved in slap fighting, a controversial venture that has drawn widespread criticism. Makhachev argues that White's attention is divided, and that the UFC is suffering as a result. The next chapter of this story will explore the aftermath of the fine. How is Makhachev responding? What are the fighters saying? And will this be the moment that changes the UFC forever? The $10 million fine didn't just impact Islam Makhachev. It sent shockwaves through the entire UFC roster, forcing fighters to choose sides in a conflict that has exposed the deep tension between the promotion and its athletes. The MMA world is divided. Some fighters are speaking out publicly, risking the same punishment that Makhachev received. Others are staying silent, protecting their careers. But the message is clear: the UFC's power is being challenged, and the fighters are watching. The fine has reignited discussions about fighter pay, promotional fairness, and Dana White's leadership. Makhachev's criticism of the UFC's promotional machine struck a nerve with fighters who feel undervalued and overlooked. His claim that the organization has lost interest in promoting fighters, and that Dana White is already slowly starting to look for people who will replace him, has resonated with many who believe the UFC's focus has shifted away from its athletes. The contrast between the fine and the UFC's treatment of other fighters is stark. Some have pointed out that Jon Jones, who has been openly critical of the UFC in the past, has never faced a punishment of this magnitude. Others have noted that Conor McGregor, who has repeatedly clashed with the promotion, has been protected and promoted, despite his controversies. The perception is that the UFC plays favorites, and that Makhachev, despite being the pound-for-pound king, is not one of them. The debate over the fine has also reignited discussions about the UFC's promotional strategy. Makhachev argued that the UFC is no longer capable of turning anyone into a star, pointing to the promotion's past success with fighters like Conor McGregor, Ronda Rousey, and Brock Lesnar. Before, the UFC was capable of turning absolutely anyone into a star, Makhachev said. It was them who did it. They promoted the fighters, and they paid a lot of attention to everything. The criticism is a direct challenge to Dana White's leadership, and it comes at a moment when the UFC is under intense scrutiny. The promotion has just launched Zuffa Boxing, a direct competitor to established boxing promotions. White is also involved in slap fighting, a controversial venture that has drawn widespread criticism. Makhachev argues that White's attention is divided, and that the UFC is suffering as a result. Michael Morales, the undefeated Ecuadorian welterweight who is expected to serve as the backup for UFC 330, has also commented on the situation. He told MMA Junkie he will step to the scale as the official backup for the main event. "I will be ready," Morales said. "If something happens, I'm prepared to step in and show everyone what I can do." The comments are a reminder that the UFC machine continues to move, even as the controversy swirls. Makhachev has dismissed any notion that his camp might be affected by the turmoil. He has relocated his training to New Jersey, working alongside Khabib Nurmagomedov and coach Javier Mendez at Nick Catoni MMA. Mendez, who has trained some of the greatest champions in UFC history, has also praised Garry's mental strength as his biggest weapon. Ian Garry's mental game is huge, Mendez said in an interview with new betting sites. "That's what my book is about. It is all about mental strength and how you can do anything with mental strength if done right. But the tension between Makhachev and the UFC is unresolved. The $10 million fine is unprecedented in UFC history. Its legality is questionable, its fairness is debatable, and its impact on Makhachev's career is profound. The next chapter of this story will determine the future of the sport, and the outcome is far from certain. The $10 million fine has sent shockwaves through the UFC, but the story is far from over. Islam Makhachev's next fight is just weeks away. Ian Garry is preparing for the biggest opportunity of his career, and Dana White's unprecedented punishment has created a rift that may never fully heal. Makhachev has been here before. In 2018, after the chaotic aftermath of Khabib Nurmagomedov's victory over Conor McGregor at UFC 229, Makhachev was one of the fighters who rushed into the octagon and attacked McGregor. Dana White declared that Makhachev would never fight here again. The Nevada Athletic State Commission investigated. Suspensions were handed out. Makhachev's UFC career nearly ended before it truly began, but Khabib's intervention, his threat to leave the UFC if his teammates were punished, saved Makhachev's career. White backed down. Makhachev was welcomed back, and he has since become the #1 pound-for-pound fighter in the world. That history makes the current situation even more striking. White once nearly cut Makhachev. Now he's fined him $10 million. The relationship between the two has always been complicated, and it's about to get even more complicated. The UFC's handling of Makhachev's criticism also raises questions about the promotion's future. White has been dismissive of Makhachev's claims, publicly denying that the champion accepted a fight for the White House card. That's not true, White said. The contradiction is stark. Makhachev says one thing, White says another, and the fans are left wondering who to believe. Makhachev's manager, Ali Abdelaziz, has also weighed in on the controversy. The veteran manager, who represents some of the biggest names in the sport, has defended Makhachev's right to speak out. Islam is the pound-for-pound king, Abdelaziz said. He has earned the right to express his opinion. The UFC needs to respect that. The comments have added fuel to the fire, with some arguing that the UFC is trying to silence a fighter who has become too powerful. The countdown to UFC 330 has begun. Makhachev will defend his welterweight title against Ian Garry on August 15 in Philadelphia. The champion has made it clear what he thinks of Garry's fighting style. Style-wise, he's a tricky fighter. He constantly runs away, Makhachev said in a translated interview with Red Corner MMA. I wouldn't say he's an entertaining fighter. From this perspective, Morales, for example, he can wrestle. He goes forward. But going forward has nothing to do with Ian Garry. Garry, meanwhile, has been pushing for this fight for months. He has questioned the injury narrative around Makhachev, pointing out that the champion's hand appears to be fine based on training footage. So your hand is fine then? Garry fired back on X. No more excuses, see you August. The words were a direct challenge to the champion's credibility. Garry is not intimidated by Makhachev's reputation. He is not scared of the pound-for-pound king. He believes he can win, and he's willing to say it out loud. The fight itself promised to be a fascinating clash of styles. Garry is long, evasive, and confident in his striking. Makhachev is a wrestling machine who has dominated everyone he has faced. The champion's grappling is so elite that even Garry has acknowledged the challenge. He might get me down, Garry said. I hope he does, cause I want to prove to the world that he can't submit me. Garry is betting on his ability to survive Makhachev's ground game. The world will find out if he's right. The $10 million fine may have been Dana White's attempt to silence Islam Makhachev, but all it did was give the champion a bigger stage. The fighters are watching, the fans are furious, and the UFC's power is being questioned like never before. Makhachev faces Ian Garry at UFC 330 on August 15. The title is on the line. The record is within reach. And the tension between the champion and the promoter is at an all-time high. The cage door is closing, and once it does, nothing will be the same.